Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm gonna try to um, start the recording again. Sorry about that. Oh, there he goes. All the host settings have changed a little bit. Okay, now welcome everyone to the Fireside Chat. My name is Min Ling. I'm your host, and we're really excited to have Emily Sadari here with us today to talk about the perimenopause revolution. But before we get into the Fireside Chat, I want to quickly share a little bit about the Grateful Giraffes for those of you who are watching our YouTube because we are live streaming on YouTube. So the Grateful Giraffes are a vibrant global community of over 800 members who value gratitude, wellness, and impact and are spiritual yet grounded. We come together to co-create meaningful experiences while building a community-owned lifestyle brand dedicated to human flourishing. And as I mentioned, if you are new to the Grateful Giraffes or just watching on YouTube, you can definitely catch our other fireside chats there. And if you're interested in becoming a giraffe, you can go to gratefulgiraffes.com. Now, today's fireside chat is with Emily Sadori. And Emily is a board certified nurse practitioner and women's health and hormone expert with a gift for making complex functional and lifestyle medicine interventions accessible and doable. She's on a mission to help you understand your beautiful and intricate body systems so you know exactly how to care for yourself and so you feel amazing. She believes that optimal health comes from the right information and aligned action. Emily is here to empower you with the knowledge you need to improve your health and to empower you to take small actions every day that accumulate into a life filled with more energy, less stress, and feeling at home in your body. Welcome, Emily. We're really excited to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled
Yeah.
to be here.
Yes, we would love for you to start off by sharing a little bit about your journey and how you got into women's health.
I actually have a background in performing arts. I went to New York City the day I turned 18 and went to college to be a Broadway star. I think probably more people than people would know. I probably have a story that starts that way. And after I graduated from school and had a variety of survival jobs in music, one of the things that I did was teach music to moms and babies. And the place that I taught also had childbirth education. And so after I spent time with these very new kind of fragile mothers that were sort of like learning how to do the things, this class after me would roll in with all these pregnant bellies. And I just felt a tug in my heart, like this was the place I was supposed to be. I was supposed to be with women, at this transitional time in life. And so I went on to become a nurse midwife and went on to study and practice I worked with a lot of home birth midwives in New York City. I had 4 home births myself. And then I joined a full scope practice, meaning that we did everything from well woman care to primary care to GYN care, family planning, postpartum, menopause care, and of course, birth in the Midwest where I now live with my family. And about 4 years into that career, I was terribly burnt out. I had spent so many years in just overgiving mode. And then that was coupled with being awake at night, many nights of the week. I was always on and I had been raising, 3 babies myself. And I was pregnant with my 4th baby during COVID. And something in me just said, like, I can't keep doing this. And so after he was born in August of 2020, the height of the pandemic, I left without really having a real plan. And I had studied a lot of functional and integrative medicine. It had always been an interest of mine. It felt like midwifery was, a blend of a lot of those concepts. And the thing that I loved about midwifery and that really hooked me was that midwives really understand and value physiology when it comes to normal birth and normal pregnancy and postpartum, meaning that we understand that the endocrine system, for the most part, knows just what to do in these circumstances, that it has innate intelligence, that it can really function optimally and well if it's not disturbed. And so I really fell in love with all of those aspects of the way that the body could really perform these major life events with minimal intervention. In fact, did better with minimal intervention. And now, like telling you that part might seem like an odd segue to be working with perimenopausal and menopausal women. But when I left practice, I turned my focus to functional medicine and an integrative approach. I was doing sort of holistic GYN care, functional medicine. I was working on those typical things: gut health, nutrition, lifestyle, stress. And, what I found was that I felt sort of duped by the functional medicine model. It felt like I was told in my training that if you put people on an elimination diet and you get them to sleep and you get them to deal with their stress and you put them on the right supplements, that they get better. And, I will again highlight that the primary intervention that especially the Institute for Functional Medicine really professes in its teaching is the elimination diet. And because I am the age that I am and have the community that I have where I live, most of the women that came to see me in my practice when I opened almost 4 years ago were in perimenopause and menopause. They were just, women whose life was changing and they finally had time to focus on themselves. They maybe had ignored the way that they felt after having children. Or I think women also do this thing where we tell ourselves that, like, I'm just exhausted and kind of off because I still haven't really recovered from having kids and my whole life changed. So in the context of this new life where I'm in a stress sandwich and I've got, children who need me, maybe parents who need me, a career, like, of course I feel this way. So they'd come to me and say, what do I need to do? And we do the elimination diets and we do the gut things. And these women just weren't really getting better to the level that I wanted them to get. And, keep in mind that I am a provider that's always trying to get people off medication in my practice, like blood pressure medication, statins, heartburn medication, all the kinds of things, birth control pills that people are just given all the time in a conventional setting. But what I found was that these people needed hormones more than anything. That, as we progress through the female lifespan, our hormones are really on the decline starting in our 30s. And it will vary, of course, from woman to woman. It varies based on your genetics, your lifestyle factors, even your own child, birth history and pregnancy history, reproductive history. But by and large, most of these women who are coming into my office who had complaints of fatigue or joint pain or just GI distension or GI issues, while there was plenty for us to work on from a systemic perspective, and I still believe in many of those principles and utilize them in my practice, the thing that was really missing, that was causing the whole system to fall apart, was hormone decline. And what these people needed was prescription hormones, not herbs, although those can be helpful for a short period of time, and we can talk about that later if people have questions. But once you're really in the throes of perimenopause, hormone decline is inevitable. Like, not even all women have children, right? But every woman that lives to a certain age will go through perimenopause and eventually menopause. So that's kind of how I got into this work. It was really sort of by accident. And I think it's funny because now, even in just the last 12 to 24 months, perimenopause and menopause is having a major renaissance. And so if you are a woman, even I would say over 30, you're probably seeing this all over social media. And it's funny to me. I think that a lot of providers in, the primary care or women's health space are gravitating toward this because, there's a need from the providers. We just have a shortage of people who are literate in hormone replacement. But I never got into it because it was like the hip thing happening. It was like just the very obvious thing sitting in front of me in my office and in my clinic. And that's how I got here. So
I love that. It's almost like you were just meant to like go on this path and you were just led into like this beautiful niche but very important topic and area that a lot of women need and a lot of women need to understand. It's something that I don't understand and it's something that in my age bracket we have to understand. So can you talk a little bit about, hormones and hormone health and what happens in perimenopause for women to start to understand their bodies a little better and start to see maybe like the markers or triggers, the things that they need to start to watch out for, and how do you start the process of figuring out what kind of hormones do you need and that journey?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think that what you're highlighting here is that there's really a knowledge deficit across the female lifespan. Like when you're 12 years old or 10 years old and you're in grade school and you're getting like the sex education talk. I watched what my daughter watched in her school last year, and it was pretty terrible. It's like periods are annoying. Here's some, you need to use pads. You might need to start using deodorant. Like it's very, negative, but it's also just not educational about what's actually happening in the female body from the time of menarche, meaning when our periods begin, right? So I think it's important to start there because if you don't understand the optimal physiology of female hormones, you can't understand why it's a problem when they go away. We have this kind of negative view that like hormonal cycles, and maybe this community is probably different in their perspective, but in general, people are like, it's this annoying thing that you have to go through for a long time, and then finally it goes away, and you're kind of free of it, like once you're 50 or so. And the reality is that it's so much more than that. So it's, we think of the cycle as the period, but really the cycle is something that we're in all of the time. So we're going to talk about it as if it's a 28-day framework, but, understanding that that varies from woman to woman, right? A normal cycle, 27 to 32, something in that range is like typical, but we'll say 28 days. So all of the 28 days of the cycle, right? Not all of those are bleeding days, but you're always cycling, right? Women are lunar creatures. So we actually follow a similar pattern like to the lunar calendar, right? Men follow the sun. They change their hormones every day. Like it's the same thing, right? It's like testosterone peaks in the morning, estrogen peaks in the evening for men, and then repeat. It's like Groundhog Day, right? Very reliable. It's really why the 5-day work week was created the way that it was, right? It's for men, right? It really works really well for them in their hormonal milieu. For women, we have a totally different calendar. And so we start on day one with the first day of bleeding. That's where we begin, right? On that day, hormones are very low, right? That it's actually the sort of drop in hormones at the end of the cycle between days 21 and 28 that eventually trigger bleeding. If you're bleeding, hormones are very low. And the brain, right, is always sort of surveilling the body and picking up on what the levels are of hormones in the body. And it knows that it needs to keep reproducing this cycle in order to create ovulation. And the ovulation is essential for reproduction, of course, right? So it's sensing right now between around day 1, 2, 3 of the cycle. Okay, hormones are really low. I'm going to start to bump up a hormone called follicle stimulating hormone. That's a brain hormone. And so it's going to start to produce more follicle stimulating hormone, and that's going to cause estrogen to rise. So from days 1 to about day 12, it could be day 14, day 10, really, again, with the cycle variation, but we're going to say in a 28-day cycle around day 12, that estrogen peaks. So it's sort of on the rise from days 1 to 12. When estrogen peaks, it does several things. Now, from the cycle perspective, it triggers the release of luteinizing hormone from the brain, which if you've ever done an ovulation test, that's what you're testing, right? So you're not actually confirming that you ovulated, you're just testing if your brain has sent the signal to make you ovulate. So that peak of estrogen stimulates that, but it also does a million other things in the body. There are estrogen receptors on every cell in the body except for red blood cells. And so the whole body in a woman is also dependent on this cyclical behavior of the hormone cycle, right? We turn over our bones as a result of this peak of estrogen. We turn over our breast tissue as a result of this peak of estrogen. We form neurotransmitters. We nurture our microbiome. We turn over the insides of the blood vessels, right? So it's cardiovascularly protective for us to have this peak of estrogen. So the peak of estrogen happens, we trigger LH from the brain, and then we ovulate. And so in the second half of the cycle, we have a hormone that wasn't around in the first half called progesterone. And progesterone is made after the release of an egg from the ovary. There's a little gland that's temporary that's left behind in the ovary called the corpus luteum. That gland secretes progesterone for about 14 days. And so after estrogen hits its peak, it drops a little bit, but then when progesterone shows up, it's like, let's dance together. And both progesterone and estrogen do another little peak. And during that time, progesterone has its own jobs to do in the body. Now, of course, it has uterine specific jobs, like progesterone stabilizes the uterine lining. It's the reason why you bleed when you do, because progesterone, that little gland, only has a lifespan of about 14 days. It secretes hormones for about 14 days. And then when it goes away, the uterine lining releases and we start all over again. But you're making billions of cells, right? You're growing new capillaries in the uterus every time you go through this hormone cycle. And again, these hormones are not specific only to the pelvic organs. They touch the entire body system. So we lose collagen when this system breaks down. We lose neurotransmitter production, right? So I could keep going on and on about physiologically what's happening, but what that looks like for the woman, right, is that she may start feeling in her 30s more tired. She may have more trouble building muscle mass. She may notice that she's gaining just a little bit of weight around her waist that she never seemed to have before without any change in her diet or lifestyle. She may start to notice a creeping up of her cholesterol for no reason, right? That's completely, again, unrelated to diet. And then the list just sort of goes on and on and on. She might start losing hair. She might notice that her thyroid isn't functioning as well as it was before. So she's feeling brain fog. Her sleep might suddenly not be as like hard and deep as it used to be. She may notice that she's more restless. And I think many women attribute this to children. Like you'll hear this said like, oh, I know you had a baby, but don't worry, you won't sleep until they leave for college. And then you'll be in menopause, so you won't sleep still. But I would argue that, there should be a time after our children are sleeping through the night where sleep should still be easy and deep. Like, that sleep when you were like a teenager and you're like dead and you wake up and you're like, what day is it? Like you kind of stop having that in midlife. And women just kind of brush it off and they explain it all away as it was stress or it was this. And really it's hormonal in nature. Now, if you're sitting here and listening and you're like, why isn't this just like very common knowledge, right? Because if you've ever gone to a doctor at 38 years old or 48 years old or 42 years old or 52, right? But especially if it's perimenopause, so like this, and when the cycle is still happening, but you're having all these symptoms and you say like, I'm just not feeling like myself, I'm more tired, right? The advice that you're typically given is like, maybe you need to eat better, maybe you need to exercise more, maybe some antidepressants would be helpful, right? The number of women on antidepressants is increasing exponentially every year after 40, right? There's not like a brain deficiency problem in women, right? And the same pattern does not happen for men. It just doesn't, right? It's specific to women, but we're just not hormonally focused. We don't have a hormone focused lens, especially in conventional medicine. And I would argue to say that part of the reason for that is that we really didn't even identify the molecule of estrogen until, sometime in the early 20th century. And we didn't start putting it into practice until, more like between the 50s and the 70s, right? Around when the birth control pill was born as well. And then we finally had a big study about it that launched in the last part of the 20th century and was halted in large part in 2002. This is called the Women's Health Initiative Study, very important study, very well designed in many ways. But the authors of the study sort of misrepresented some of the data and preeminently sort of preemptively stopped the study in 2002 when they believed there was a significant increased risk of breast cancer associated with the use of hormone replacement therapy. We now know that that increased risk was actually not statistically significant. And, there's lots more to learn about sort of the Women's Health Initiative, but the takeaway here really is that this caused a media firestorm. And after that point, everyone was so afraid of estrogen that I believe we just kind of shut our brains down to it. And so we stopped really seeing it as a good guy. Even when I was in graduate school and we were learning about like risk factors for things, it was so close to the time of this study data being released that really we were starting to talk about everything through the lens of the less estrogen exposure you have in your lifetime, the better off you're going to be. And that's just actually not true, right? We know that women who go through menopause earlier or have premature ovarian insufficiency, which means being menopausal before age 40, is a huge risk factor and comes with a massive increased risk of a cardiovascular event, right? Of having cardiovascular disease at an earlier age. Alzheimer's is massively increased risk, right, for women who have earlier menopause, right? So we know all of these things to be true now, but we have a whole generation of medical providers who were trained, like myself, on the heels of this study data coming out. And like good providers, we wanted to do the best and the right thing by our patient, right? Do no harm is central, right, to I think any care provider's training and desires and goals with their patients. And so we're just really like trying to pick up the pieces and make up for all this time in which we were practicing like through a lens of fear around hormones.
Wow. There was just so much there that wisdom on my I didn't even know like the journey and like the what happens every month in my body like and I love how you break it down and make it really, really simple. And for women who are in this phase and they're experiencing these brain fogs, they're experiencing like the weight gains, like what can they start doing? Is it like just taking
Mhm.
estrogen supplements at the right time or the progesterone at the right time? Or is it more than that? Like how do you start to balance your hormones and how do you even start there?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think number one, finding someone to partner with who can really help you figure out where you're at, right? Because just like everything, I want to be really clear that even though estrogen is massively important, it is not a magic bullet, right? There are still physiologic changes that happen associated with aging where we really need to be addressing the whole system, right? So an adequate thyroid workup, someone who can really support you to be tailoring your nutrition for an aging female body, right? Aging female bodies tend to need more protein because we have a harder time maintaining muscle mass as we age, right? We are more prone to insulin resistance with the decline of hormones, and we need to eat a sort of, pro a healthy insulin diet, right? So it's really, about taking that whole picture approach. And then, in addition, this is something that's not really sussed out in the literature adequately, in my opinion. But what I see is that, sort of in the same way that conventional medicine got really scared about hormones, there was a similar reaction in like the integrative space. And it created a real opportunity for the only people who were talking about hormones were the naturopaths and the chiropractors and the health coaches and all of the different specialty types of people who practice healthcare and support, because everybody else wasn't talking about it, or they were just giving birth control or saying like deal with it. So they're like this, all of these other professions were like, we'll take up the charge here. And the good thing about that is that we learned a lot about other ways that we can promote a healthy hormonal system, right? So we learned about like the importance of stress and cortisol in terms of how our thyroid will function and how our sex hormones will function and how well progesterone can be made in the presence of stress, how important sleep is. We learned how, gut dysfunction can disrupt hormone function. And all of those things like are true, but it's really a both and, right? Because interestingly, like in that sort of alternative medicine space, we also had a major departure away from like believing that estrogen was a good thing. So that's where I think people started getting really excited about the term estrogen dominance. And you got to clear your estrogen and like get rid of your estrogen is bad, right? So it was kind of like this, it was like the same thing, but in like different clothes. And I think that like what we can do is like take a lot of the good information from that. And that's sort of how my practice functions, is that we really do look at people as a whole person. We are testing all of the micronutrients and metabolic functions. Because again, like you can't practice hormone care in a silo. It's something, a system that's communicating with the whole body. So to really answer your question, I would say like the most important thing for someone who is moving through their 30s and 40s, who's starting to feel off or different, is start with lifestyle and assessment, right? It never hurts to get a hormone assessment. Say that this is a tricky one because it is my opinion, and I would say that there is clinical data that would support this, that you cannot assess hormone sufficiency, meaning do you have enough, with urine testing or saliva testing, right? Which is those are not necessarily, I'm speaking very generally, but they tend to be favored in kind of more an alternative environment. It's really important to get serum blood work, and it's important that blood work is done on the right day of your cycle. That's really going to depend on how long your cycles are, when and if you have symptoms, or if you're cycling at all, right? If you're not cycling, then we know that there's a bigger issue, and certainly blood work is an important part of the workup. So you want to be finding someone to partner with who can help you with a really intelligent workup. But you also want to be looking at everything. You really want to be, again, assessing the thyroid, assessing adrenal status. I think that this is a place where conventional medicine is still really behind, that they're not looking at cortisol production. They're certainly not looking at it over a like pseudo 24-hour period of time. They're not looking at cortisol metabolism and all of the things that we're doing in the functional space to really say, like, you know, yes, there may be a place for estrogen or progesterone or even thyroid hormone, but we also have this going on. And, you know, I think that it's so important for women, for patients in general, to have as much information as possible about what's going on in their body, because otherwise it just feels like a directive. Like, in order to have like shared decision making and to be really motivated and feel like you're a part of this plan, and if you're gonna, especially if you're gonna make lifestyle changes, you want to have a context for making those changes. So I do like to have all of that information as well. And of course, you want to look at micronutrients, macronutrients, right? Many things like magnesium, right? Omegas in the diet. All of these things are also going to change your relationship with aging, right? And change your experience of aging. So I think that the whole piece is important. And then to give people like a few more little kind of nugget takeaways, I would say that protein is extremely important as we age. I particularly find that plant-based diets are incredibly difficult to execute well, and that they become calorically detrimental to women in perimenopause and menopause. There are going to be a few people who are exceptions to this rule, but by and large, my experience in clinical practice is that it's very difficult to achieve optimal protein consumption and healthy insulin on a plant-based diet, because remember, like we want to have a good ratio of macros, so carbohydrates to fat to protein. It is extremely important to have B12, especially if you're dealing with metabolic issues like weight gain, insulin resistance. You know, if you're just feeling like your body composition is changing, it is extremely important to do resistance training, right? To lift weights, to build muscle, because muscle is a metabolic organ, and it helps you to regulate insulin and glucose. There's really nothing else that does it like muscle does. So I often recommend creatine to women in perimenopause and menopause, especially if they're on a weight loss journey. It is extremely important to have a full thyroid panel and not just a TSH and free T4, which is commonly what's done in a conventional setting. And to treat the thyroid really aggressively might be a strong word, but I would say it's important to treat the thyroid aggressively because it's so important for ovarian function. And in early perimenopause, you may not need hormone replacement therapy. And I'm very quick to bring it on if I do think it's important, but depending on the person's values, their preferences, also their symptoms, what's going on, they may benefit from something like Vitex, right? Vitex is an herb that works really well for optimizing ovarian response to the brain and kind of orchestrating that communication and helping to produce more, balanced hormones in the sort of very early perimenopause phase. Maca can be a really nice intervention. So there are lots of things that you can do early on. And then, at a certain point, exploring estrogen, progesterone, testosterone are all things that can be a major game changer. And, I say this with full compassion, understanding that probably many of you are not people that like prescription medications. And again, 4 home births, right? Like, none of my children had antibiotics until I'd been a mother for like 6 years. Like this is who I am. I hate big pharma. And like, I also like to live optimally, and I like my body to function really well, and to use body identical hormones to, in a way, like prolong the aging process, right? Delay the aging process, because a lot of aging takes place with the loss of hormones, right? So if I can make my whole body function better and I can avoid sort of problems associated with aging, particularly insulin resistance, metabolic issues, right? That would be sort of the biggest problem in our population, even with healthy people, right? That we just have this metabolic mismatch with our environment, and the decline of hormones is just completely deleterious on a woman's metabolism. So that's where I'd say to get started. Is that helpful, Minling?
It is super helpful and also admittedly overwhelming as well too. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, there's so much that I need to do. Like, what do I tackle first? Heather even asked, like, is there a list of like vitamin supplements where like for each symptoms, like where do we
Hmm.
like find
Well,
these things?
yeah, I mean, I think that it's an interesting question because what I would say to that is that I really believe in being very cautious about how you're treating symptoms with supplements, right? We want to be treating the system, not the symptoms, right? So if you're having a variety of symptoms that are related to estrogen decline, will you feel better if you use something like maca or black cohosh or soy isoflavones, things like that, that are known to kind of address the estrogen receptor? Potentially, yes. Are they gonna promote bone growth? Are they gonna really change insulin metabolism? Like probably not, not at least not long term, right? So I just think it's the take home really is that there are supplements that help the system, right? Like vitamin D is essential. Like I said, B12, omega fish oil, magnesium, right? These are like essential really for any woman, especially with the crops that we have in the United States. Um, Symptoms, I'm just cautious in terms of recommending things to treat symptoms because I think it's missing the point somewhat. And the point being that like if you are a person that's interested in this sort of idea around biohacking, this idea of sort of hacking into the computer system of your body and saying like, well, if I press this lever and I do this thing, then I'm going to have better mitochondrial function for a longer, right? I think it's way too early. We don't have enough evidence to say that like hormone replacement therapy prevents Alzheimer's, like conclusively. We can't say those are prevents, but we do know it does reduce the risk of cardiovascular disease. We know that women on HRT live an average of 5 years longer. Like if that was men, it would be all over the New York Times. I mean, it's crazy, right? So I think it's more thinking from that systemic perspective. Hormone replacement therapy is the number one biohacking tool for women, in my opinion, over a certain age, for sure. So it's really like getting the information and then making decisions about like, where is the system deficient and what does it actually need to perform its best?
I love that. It's like I love how you go back to like the system is just not like just treating one aspect, and that's why it's a holistic approach that's so important. And I love how you also bring up like the foods that we're eating as well, because
Mhm.
I was a vegetarian for a long time, and in the last year and a half, I'm like, I just want meat. So I'm like, oh my gosh,
Mhm.
like it is like our body knows that it's deficient in something and it's going into a next phase, and it needs the extra, vitamins, nutrients that we're not getting. Atari and Shannon asked, what day of the cycle for the blood work? They wanted to get some
Yeah.
clarification.
So in general, I think people may have heard of getting labs on like day 5. I would say that doesn't apply in perimenopause and menopause because that's the point when hormones are supposed to be low. So without like calling out other providers, I would question if you're experiencing perimenopause or if you're over 35 really and you're having, symptoms that you think are related to hormone decline, day 5 is not the day. Day 21, if you're cycling well, is a good time to do progesterone, estradiol, estrone, testosterone, DHEA. Those are all the very basics that I would make sure are done. You can also, of course, do a full thyroid panel on just about any day of the cycle. And I think if there's a lot of, remember that because the cycle is a pattern, it's not just a single day. You may not get all the information from that day. And what I often find in perimenopause is that estradiol and estrone will appear high or normal, high, I would say with quotations, and in that luteal phase, that second half of the cycle, and we're missing a whole bunch of information that's happening before that. So I wouldn't like take it as like this is gospel, what's happening on day 21. And if there's question, there's lots of other ways to assess hormones throughout the cycle. I think Dutch cycle mapping is actually a really good way. Even though I said urine hormones can't tell you sufficiency, they can't on a single day, right? But if you're looking at it over the course of the cycle, You will get a better relative kind of picture about general sufficiency or insufficiency and patterning. Like, are you getting a good peak of estrogen in the first half of the cycle? That's often where things start to fall apart for women in perimenopause. There's also a lot of at-home testing kits like the Mira kit, and I don't have an affiliation with them. We use them in practice. And you can, it's kind of like doing your own Dutch cycle mapping at home. You can test your hormones daily and kind of track your estradiol, progesterone, and even your LH levels. So that's that hormone that surges right before ovulation. So that's a really good way to data track. And I also just really recommend, no matter what age someone is, as long if you're still cycling at all, I do really love temperature tracking. And I think it's something that we should be teaching women in that middle school science class when we talk about periods, is like, this is our body's information, that it's there for you. It's a vital sign. I personally love the Aura ring because it tracks temperature and you can have it sync with natural cycles. Again, no affiliation. I just love this and I use it in clinical practice all the time. And just seeing if you're having a good temperature rise in the second half of the cycle it gives you a lot of information.
I love how you bring this up because it's really about understanding your body and being in tune with your body. And so these markers are just ways for us to understand our body more, and then so we can help support it. And you know, that's the most important thing, is like, how can we sync up with our body so that we can understand it, so that we can support it, so that we can create that longevity and that healthy, optimal life that you've been talking about. So I love
Totally. And I really think that like the Gen Zers and I don't alphas or whatever, like the youngins are being called these days, are gonna have a totally different experience of this hormonal transition, because especially some of them, right, thanks to social media, are going to be temp tracking. And there's a daisy bracelet. There's all kinds of ways to temp track passively. When I started doing it, I had to like actually sit there for like a full 60 seconds and let the stupid thermometer track and then to write it. It's like that just doesn't exist anymore. So they're going to have all this knowledge, and then you start to know, like, you see trends, and so you can anticipate when there's a shift happening. And I think that that's one way that we're really giving our power away as women. It's like we go to an office and we want them to tell us what's happening. You're living in the body, and like, yeah, they may have access to some testing that could be helpful, but ideally you're bringing all of this knowledge and information to the table. And obviously, ideally, your provider is valuing that.
Yeah, I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to explore all these new technologies as well too. I'm like you, I'm like, oh, I'm too
So
lazy. I
good.
want a temperature check because I don't want to sit there for like 60 seconds and wait for it to like tell me. And it's just one more thing
Mhm.
to do. So I love the passive ways. Can you talk a little bit about, I know you touched upon it, like, about like herbs versus like hormone actual supplements, or not supplements, but medicine as well. Like what the differences are, and like why is it important to just not just focus on supplements, because everybody has like, I know I have a whole cabinet full of supplements, but it's
Oh
probably
my gosh. And
not
just,
helping.
there's such a movement right now, right? Like, people have dollar signs in their eyes around perimenopause and menopause because it's finally getting attention. It's having its heyday. So it's moment in the sun. So if you're of a certain age and you open up social media, you're going to see a million supplement ads, right? And these mostly have some of these estrogen modulating herbs in them that may reduce some symptoms of perimenopause and menopause. They are not going to be disease preventative, right? And they're not going to change mitochondrial production, right? And health. They may manage some symptoms. I rarely use herbs like this in my practice, and sometimes in early perimenopause. Honestly, early perimenopause is a lot like treating fertility patients, because you're just trying to optimize ovarian function, right? So B vitamins are really important for ovarian function. Antioxidants, vitamin C is really important for ovarian function. Vitamin D. You want to treat inflammation in the body. So things like glutathione and other antioxidants are really important for ovarian function. So I focus on those first, and then there are some herbs like Vitex that are really helpful if you are someone who has a history of PCOS or some more androgen dominant kind of symptoms, sort of hormonal pattern acne on the chin or jaw, maybe hair growth, hair loss on the head, but hair growth in other areas, long cycles, If you've ever been told you had PCOS, things like spearmint can really help there. And inositol is another one that's really good for kind of that pattern, and also just dealing with insulin resistance and glucose behavior and blood sugar is really important in that case. So those are the things that you're kind of see in that category. And then again, as we get further along, a lot of people use a lot of adaptogens, like ashwagandha, shatvari, the list goes on and on and on. And you may see, like, again, because there's this huge overlap, all the endocrine systems are talking to each other. So adrenal function is super important, right? You can't out herb your way, from a poor sleeping schedule. If you're exposed to blue light all day, you never get sunlight, like you never have experience connection or calm or anything like that. But they can be helpful, right? They can be helpful. And so I do like the use of adaptogenic herbs. But again, they don't treat perimenopause and menopause, right? They may treat adrenal dysfunction and help you, kind of with that restoration, but estrogen decline, especially past a certain age, I think once people start to get into sort of their mid 40s, especially if we start to see some biomarkers changing, insulin resistance creeping up, cholesterol creeping up, sleep, like if sleep is really derailed and the person is always waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning, I am definitely, like, we have herbs at our disposal for sure, and they can be supportive. I actually really like melatonin in perimenopause because it's a massive antioxidant. It's really great for ovarian health as well. But it's estrogen, right? Estrogen actually is the major governor of something called the suprachiasmatic nucleus in the brain, which is the sort of receiving area for light. It's like the light that goes into your eyes goes right to the SCN. And so when the SCN is not functioning well because of the loss of estrogen, women kind of feel like they're in a persistent state of jet lag. And like that, you can take all the mitochondrial supplements you want, all the melatonin, all the like whatever, you're like dancing around the problem, right? And also pouring a lot of money down the drain. So I love supplements, but like you have to treat the problem with the problem.
That makes a lot of sense. It's again, it's like anything. You can't just treat the symptoms. It's only like a band-aid, and you have to go
Yeah.
deeper into what's really there.
But I
I
think, do you want me to talk about the different types of hormone replacement therapy?
Oh
Because
yeah, that would be great.
okay,
Sure.
that's probably helpful. So, there's sort of, you may have heard of the North American Menopause Society. There's kind of a group of people online that call themselves the Menopause, and they're all sort of OBGYNs and nurse practitioners, who, are kind of in this camp of sort of following society guidelines. But for the most part, do standard of care, which means that they're, using static hormone replacement, mostly in the form of an estrogen patch, occasionally oral estrogen. I never prescribe oral estrogen because it does increase the risk of blood clots. And it tends to be harder on the liver, and it's not a great option. So I don't use it at all. But that's still, an FDA-approved treatment. So they tend to use estradiol patches and oral progesterone, otherwise known as Prometrium, which is the brand name. And most of the time, this will be given, especially postmenopausally, in a static continuous fashion, meaning that every day you're getting, a certain amount, 0.05 milligrams of estrogen all day long via your patch, which you change twice weekly. And then you're also getting oral progesterone. And the reason for the daily progesterone being all the time in postmenopause is that it suppresses the uterine lining. So estrogen is a progenerative hormone, right? It's a growth factor hormone. It causes buildup of the uterine lining. And so you need progesterone to prevent that buildup of the uterine lining. Now, again, I love physiology. I love what the body created as this is like the system that we're supposed to live in of this 28 days, and that it's not just the absence or the presence of hormones that make the difference. It's like, are they following the pattern, right? I wouldn't tell you to take thyroid hormone at nighttime because that's not how your body secretes it, right? You always take it in the morning. And there's probably people here who are on thyroid meds, right? You take it as soon as you wake up in the morning. Same thing with hormones. We're not meant to have like a basal, slow, low level of hormones all the time. And we're certainly not meant to have a way more progesterone than we have estrogen. And so if you've been on HRT before, or you've been offered this as an option, like a patch and oral progesterone, this may be one of the reasons why you don't feel great, right? Progesterone also, if you don't have enough estrogen, progesterone doesn't have the receptors to even be useful. And so it kind of floats around the body can get converted to cortisol, which cortisol makes you retain water, gain weight, get a puffy face, all these kind of unpleasant symptoms. So again, it's better than nothing for many women, especially in postmenopause, but it's not my preferred methodology. You can also do a patch and phasic, progesterone, meaning you only take it 2 weeks out of the month. And so this will sometimes be prescribed for women in perimenopause who still have their period, taking the estrogen patch all the time. And there's different increments of dosing for the patch. And then they do oral progesterone for 14 days. And when they take it away, they get their period, right? That may work for some people for a little bit of time. But again, you're getting a static, meaning the same level of estrogen all the time. There are pellets, which I'm not a huge fan of because they tend to, first of all, focus on testosterone, which I prefer to replace testosterone after estrogen has been optimized because they hit the same receptors. And so I like to add it kind of like the icing on the cake at the end, but pellet companies tend to promote the use of testosterone pellets as like a first line intervention. And also they produce what I like to say is like supraphysiologic doses of testosterone, meaning way above what your body would ever make or need. And so people might feel really good at first, but over time they can experience hair loss, male patterned hair growth, acne, and all kinds of other kind of unpleasant symptoms. And also we're just sort of missing the main event, which is like optimizing estrogen, which is just so important, especially for disease prevention. So I'm not a fan of pellets. And the type of hormone replacement that we do primarily in my practice, although we do static forms of hormone replacement as well, is something called physiologic restoration, which you can learn about. There's a nonprofit called the Women's Hormone Network. You can just Google .org if you want to have like free education. Again, I'm not affiliated with them in any way, but they're really a wealth of information. And that would be using transdermal creams. Actually, you can probably see in the background that little pink tube over there on my table. That's my demo estrogen cream. And we have different doses every day. So we phase the estrogen dosing to mimic what a healthy young menstrual cycle patterning would look like. And we also do the same with progesterone, either in transdermal or oral form. Really just depends on the person and kind of their symptom profile and what works better for them, oral or transdermal. And this method does produce a period. So I actually find it works really great in perimenopause, but women can continue to do it into menopause. If you look up Dr. Felice Gersh, she's a legend in the hormone space, and she's in her late 70s and uses this form of hormone replacement therapy. And you won't meet a smarter, like more sort of on top of it woman traveling the world, teaching, like having a full business, life, career, everything. And I guess that's the biggest thing for me, and sort of the reason that I'm so passionate about this is that I have 4 kids. I have a lot of goals. I have a lot of dreams. I have a lot of things I want to do. And I literally can't afford a 10% reduction in capacity. I cannot afford to not be like at my maximum optimal self all the time. And when I started HRT a little over a year ago, it was like somebody took the tired out of my eyes. Like within 24 hours, I felt that. And there's so many physiologic reasons that I can explain that with, but that's not as important as just understanding that like it feels like a crime to me that something where like we give testosterone to men so easily, we never question replacing thyroid. And when we replace thyroid, we replace it to optimal levels. We don't give you just enough to survive, right? Which is kind of some of the trend in the hormone replacement therapy world, in my opinion, of where it is right now. We want to optimize your levels to be that of a highly functioning, most optimal woman and give you the most disease prevention, the most all these things. And we still need a lot of research, right? A lot of this is clinical experience based, right? And definitely lots of intuition and practice and kind of working with people one-on-one hours of work that like have got me to this place as a practitioner. But it's just something that I think everybody deserves. And it's really, truly life-changing.
Wow, we've learned so much. Like through this journey. I mean, you've like broken it down in very simplistic terms for us, in terms of like what we need to do and what we need to look at to understand our body and our hormone health. And we're just really, really grateful for all of, what you shared. I would love for you to share a little bit about like last advice, any key takeaways that you want to leave the audience with around this topic.
Yeah, I would say something that I learned as a midwife a long time ago was that women always know. Even if somebody called me up and they were like, and my brain was like, oh, they do not sound like they're in labor, like whatever. I would, if I didn't know what to do, I would say, what do you think? And women are always right. They always know. So, like, if you have a feeling that you don't feel as good as you could, do not stop. Do not settle, even if you have the person as you're on your team who somebody else said was the best thing ever. Like, if you don't feel as good as you think you could, obviously we have to take ownership and participate in our wellness journey. We can't like expect someone to do it all for us and fix us. So that's like the trap mindset. But if you feel like there's more and your intuition is telling you that, I promise you there is. There are a lot of really competent, amazing people like creating results like this. And so just listen to your inner voice and don't settle.
I love that. It's so true. Our body has so much wisdom. It's just trying to tell us. It's like, hello, I'm here. Just pay attention to me. So that's such a great advice. And Mandy asked, how can she get in touch with you? I think there's a lot of people that want to learn more, or want to like go on this path and this journey. I did
Yeah.
post your Instagram, but yeah, how do
Yeah.
people get in touch with you?
Yeah. So emilysadri.com is a good place to start. We're in the middle of a big rebrand of our telemedicine practice. So you won't see like the practice information up yet, but it will be there soon. And on Instagram. And you can always message me on Instagram and I'll tell you about, what we have going on and what opportunities there are for people no matter where you live.
Well, thank you so much, Emily.
Yeah.
This was so insightful. I think everybody like here learned so much about themselves, about what to look for, what to do, and we are just so grateful that you're, you have a busy practice and you spent this hour with us just sharing about perimenopause and our hormone health and how we can optimize our health so that we can live a beautiful, fulfilled life. So thank you so much for being here, and we really appreciate you.
Thank you guys so much for having me and for your time and attention. It was really a pleasure and a joy.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.